Hello everyone, this is Laura from Grain & Company. Today we're going to go through the new project in our Creative Maker box for January 2020. In your box you will find your sign base with your I Love You design laser cut. For this project you will need your 2-inch brush. You will also need a foam brush as well for staining. You will need your paired gloves, and you will need some of your baby wipes. If you have a toothpick, that would also work as well for doing any cleaning out of the lines. And then you'll need your 3 paint colors. We have Casement, Weathered, Whole Wheat Stain, and our new color called Blush. All right, so let's get started. So what you're gonna do is we're gonna start with the back piece. When you get it out of your box, you notice the edges might just be a little more sharp. So you can take your 120 grit sandpaper, which is the grittier one, and you can take that along the edges and smooth those over. And then you can follow up with the 400, which will help smooth those out a little bit more. All right, so what you're gonna do is grab your 2-inch brush, and we're going to start with the white because we're going to need to do 2 coats on this, and it's a bigger project, so you want to get that to start drying first. So what you're going to do is take your white paint. Now when we do this particular project, we are not painting the back. We haven't provided you enough paint to do that. However, if you do have that color at home or you have another white, you can always do that as well. So when I'm painting a bigger board like this, it is easier to do the edges first, because that way you can hold your board and rotate it as you do that, than it is to paint the top first and then you're struggling to try and balance it so you can paint the edges. So I will start by doing the edges, and I like to tip my board a little bit, so I'm going to get a little bit of paint on my brush, and so you can see there's not a whole lot. And I like to usually start in the middle, so that way I can work one way and then the other. And you don't want so much on your brush because you're doing the sides and it's not a big area, so you can just keep re-dipping. So as you do the sides, you'll notice you'll get some buildup of paint. I just tend to bring my brush in there and just feather that over, so that way it's easier for it to blend when you do the front. Okay, so I go back in again. As you do the next side, you always want to check for the drips on the other side, so you just want to smooth that over. And then I'm going to come back in here. See, I didn't necessarily dip my brush again on this side because I felt like I had enough paint. And so I'm just going to feather that out. Once again, check your edges. Come up here to smooth that out. And keep rotating. Now on my surface I have a piece of paper, but I also have a piece of parchment paper underneath. That way if any paint happens to drip off of the sides, it's not going to stick to your paper. It'll just easily lift off of your parchment paper surface. Okay, so the first coat doesn't have to be perfect. We'll do a second to solid anything that's a little lighter. And now you're going to lay this down in the direction of the grain, because it always looks more natural to paint with the grain than it is to go across, and we want to work with those lines there as well. So now add a little bit more paint, and I like to start at the top and work my way down rather than try and put everything in the middle and try and get it laid out before it has a chance to dry. So this way I'm getting it on and working in one section at a time. So I started in the middle, I brought it to the left, I brought it to the right with gentle movements, and then I went in and got that paint in those grooves, and then my final strokes will take me right across. I also want to check those edges very lightly, make sure no paint dripped over the sides. By taking your final stroke all the way across, it eliminates any start and stop marks you might get, especially when you're painting white. You can always see those lift marks, so go back and forth when you're laying it. I'll show you again. Got some paint on there. I come down a little further from where I left off, get those edges, get it on there, and then gently sweep across and even those out. Now, depending how much paint you have on your brush, you might feel that the brush starts to drag. Now, when it's doing that, it means the paint is starting to dry and it wants to pull on that, or you don't have enough paint on your brush. So don't worry about if the first coat isn't solid. You're still going to see some of that underlying color, and we'll correct that when we get to the second one. The biggest thing you want to do is make sure that you don't have those brush strokes. And then when you are evening it out, don't put too much pressure. You just really want to glide the brush over top. Too much pressure can make it show more brush strokes. So get that paint on. Not worrying about how my brush is laying those strokes. And then once I'm done, very lightly even that out. Remember, you can turn your brush sideways and then go like that. You don't want to overwork that paint because that's what's going to leave those marks. And as it starts to dry, you're going to see some part is darker and some is lighter because paint always dries darker. So don't worry that you felt like some areas you put more paint on. It will all even out as it starts to dry. All right, take your brush and gently smooth that over. Remember, check your edges. Just gently feather. When you're doing that, you really shouldn't have very much paint. So when you're lifting it up, you shouldn't be leaving a blob of paint at the side, because otherwise then you're gonna need to feather that out so you're not left with this ridge on the edge. Okay, and I should be able to get the last part done here. Oh, my board is wanting to slide, so I'm just gonna put my finger on it. Okay, come back here and smooth that out. Very light pressure, because even if it is gently starting to dry, if you put very little pressure, you're just skimming that board. It'll help even that paint out. But if you really push on it, you will definitely see more drag marks. All right, so that is the first coat. It's going to dry. And when you're doing that, you can grab like a Ziploc bag, stick your brush in there, because this won't take more than 5-10 minutes depending on your environment for us to give a sanding coat and go ahead and do the second coat. So I'm just going to go grab a bag for my brush and I'll be back and we'll continue on with the rest of the sign. Okay, so I have a bag for my brush, and just cover up your paint, put the lid on, and set that off to the side. And if it's really wet where you still can't handle the sides, then just lift it up by its parchment paper. Mine seems to be pretty good there, so I'm just going to take it there. Now, if you're using the same area for your stain, I like to just flip my parchment paper over. That way I don't have to worry about getting any paint on my stained area. All right, so if you bring this back, you'll see there's tape holding this together. So what you're going to do is going to take off the tape, and we're going to start to section this into the colors that we will need to do. So your outer frame will come off like this. Now at any time, and I do my best to try and check on this, at any time if something is slightly stuck and it will not come out, flip it over. This might be harder now, okay? Flip it over. Like for some reason it didn't cut through all the way, take an X-Acto knife and just gently cut through that. But like I said, I do my best to make sure every piece is easily going to come out of its template here. So anyways, you take this and we're going to stain with that. So we're going to put that off to the side. This is a template to help center your heart in there. So we don't need to do anything with that except set it to the side. This we will paint pink. This we will paint white. So I'm going to set that off to the side. And for me, I'm going to stain the stand for your sign. So I'm going to bring that in as well. So with your gloves, and your stain, you'll need a piece of lint-free paper towel, is what I use. Blue Shop towels work really great. It doesn't have to be super fancy. You just don't want it to really leave any lint. So if you really have like an old, thin towel or t-shirt or whatever, that will work just to wipe off the stain. So we're gonna start with the frame. Now the frame on the back has adhesive, so we don't need to stain that, and we don't need to stain the sides. So we're really just doing the top. Now we use a water-based stain so it dries faster and it doesn't have that odor like an oil does. So I give a good dip into my brush and just kind of wipe off the rest. And what I like to do is I like to wipe it on with the foam brush. So instead of just using this tip and going all over, I have more control if I turn it on its side and I start wiping. Now right now you'll find I'm going against the grain, and I don't like that, but it's really hard when you're trying to wipe it like this. So I'm just going to wipe all the way around, and you can see as I'm wiping, I can control exactly where I want it to be. Now, as it starts to run out of stain in your brush, you just want to make sure you add just a little bit more, because you want that surface to be just slightly damp. So that way you can come back with your cloth and wipe it. Now on the sides here where I was staining against the grain, I'm going to come in and wipe it so it goes with the grain. Once again, that looks most natural, and by wiping it and removing any of the light dampness, it evens it all out, and then we will let it dry. So unlike paint, paint will darken as it dries, stain will lighten as it dries, and then we're going to sand it as well after, so it'll soften that look as well. So that part is done. So you can set that off to the side, and then you can bring in your easel stand. So if you choose to paint them, that's fine. We provided you stain to do it. Once again, give it a little dip, and then just wipe it all over on both sides. You'll see some sides of the easel are discolored by a little charring from the machine. Don't worry about that. It will all blend once you stain. Now, as you get stain in your gloves and you start to handle this, you could leave stain imprints. So just give an initial wipe and then come back and like hold the sides and even that out so you don't have any wet blotches all over. And this really doesn't need a whole lot. Flip it over. Now this particular piece is kind of hard to stain in the direction of the grain. I am not worried about that. And then you can just give it, let's wipe here. Just like that. And then we're just gonna leave that and let that dry. And we'll do some sanding after on that. So when you're done, your foam brushes will last you for quite some time to reuse them over and over again until really the little plastic piece tends to stick out through the foam. So just wash them up and reuse them for any of your other craft projects, and then you can toss them away when they no longer are usable. Okay, so we're gonna set that there. You can remove your gloves, and I'm going to keep my paper towel because I'm gonna need to do some blotting off with paint, so I'm just gonna use this as much as I can. So I'm going to fold that stain inside and put that off to the side, and I'm going to flip this back over. Bring my paper towel out, and now I'm going to bring in my heart and my pink colored paint. So for this, we are going to use a makeup wedge, and if I did forget to mention that at the beginning, we do need that as well. So you'll have a full one, and when you're done with it, don't throw it away, because what I find is I will cut them in half sometimes. Sometimes you have an area that doesn't need a big area like this, so you can use it, and then when it's dry, you can cut that off, get rid of that hard part of the paint, and now you have another sponge you can keep using until, really it's pretty small. But this allows you to use those little thin lined projects when you're doing or painting of the laser kits. So yeah, just make a little stash of those and you'll be good. Okay, so next we're going to do the heart. So you can paint this with a small brush. That is totally fine. The object is to try and avoid getting paint on the sides, and that's where the the baby wipes come into play. So I'm just gonna have one here, but if you're a person who doesn't paint very fast, then you may just want to pull that out once you are done painting this, and then you can grab a wet one. All right, so I'm gonna start off with my makeup wedge. Now, because there's quite a big area on here, normally I would blot a lot of this off because I don't want it to seep down the edges or anything like that, but I'm gonna start more into a bigger area so that I can move this paint on. So I'm kind of just squishing it in there, and then as I get to the edges, I don't have as much paint as I did in the middle. And you want to work quickly so that you're not playing with a whole bunch of paint as it dries. And I start in the middle, and then I just kind of push it out to the edge. Now don't worry so much that it's on the edges. Just try and avoid getting a lot on the edges. That's why you'll want more of your paint to be starting in the middle and then pushing it off to the side. And same thing too, you can use a brush, start in the middle, paint like we did the white sign, and try and avoid the edges if you can. I don't need a whole lot more now, so I'm just gonna kind of wipe off some of that and go like this. Now this, here I'll explain one thing in a sec. I'm just gonna finish this off. Okay, so it might look pretty blotchy, but your paint is starting to dry, and some parts are dark and some parts are light. So not worried about that, it will even out here. Now take your baby wipe and take your finger and gently go on the edges and wipe that off. That's why if there's hardly any on there, it will be easier to do. And you don't want to leave this step too long because the paint can dry fairly quickly, and you just might have to scrub a little bit more. Now when you're wiping this, because this is a burnt edge, because they are cut in the laser, it can discolor this edge a little bit, and that's fine. We can always come and wipe that back. But once this coat is done, we're gonna sand it, do another one, and it starts to even out. And I like to distress the edges, so the little bit of brown charring that gets wiped into the edges doesn't bug me at all. So baby wipe's done. Makeup sponge is done for now. So just close up your paint, and you can put your sponge into your bag as well, because it will dry out fairly quickly. So this step won't take more than a few minutes to dry, and we can come back to it. If you have to leave it a little longer because you get busy, then if this dries out, then like I said, just take your scissors and cut that part off. Okay, so we're just gonna let this set off to the side. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention. So this rectangle in here, don't worry about it. You're gonna paint over it. It's because it's a guide in helping to center this piece, so you don't have to guess where it goes. So we've made that easy for you, so it doesn't matter if it gets paint in there. Okay, so next we'll take out our little P.S. I love you sign piece. Now this has been engraved. If we take our paintbrush or makeup sponge and start to paint this, there is a very good chance you're going to fill this engraved area with paint, and the part we're trying to avoid is getting paint in there. So another technique for painting this kind of detail is, once again, take a baby wipe, and you could fold it up a couple times because it will seep through to your finger, and get a flat area and dip it a little bit in some paint. We don't need a whole lot because this really isn't a huge area. Now, don't just go to your sign with that blob of paint in there, because that blob will most likely set itself into one of those areas. So just kind of blot that and even it off, and very gently, without any pressure, just wipe across, just trying to hit the top surface, not putting any pressure in terms of squishing it into those details. And this might take 2 or 3 coats, but it's better to do very thin ones, wiping along there, just like that. If you happen to get some paint in there, you can always take a toothpick or a skewer or whatever you have that's pointy, and then you can go in there and clean it out. And you want to do that fairly quickly before it has a chance to set. So this is my first coat. You'll see that it's not perfectly covered. We're just kind of sealing those wood fibers, and we're going to come back and sand it because as you wipe with your baby wipe, you might notice that it wants to catch some of those wood fibers, and it will be easier after, once we sand the first coat, to go ahead and wipe any additional coats. So let that dry and we will come back to that. Now if you can, and you've got a little baggie, you can put those in there as well. They do tend to dry out a little faster, but if you kind of keep them closed in, they should be fine. Now, if we come back to this piece, mine is dry, so I'm just gonna grab it, and you're gonna grab your 400 grit sandpaper. Now, as with this piece, you'll notice it's very rough. It is, the moisture from the paint has raised the grain, and so we need to sand that to smooth it out, and then that will make the painting of your additional coats a lot easier. So once again, with the grain and the wood, you want to sand that smooth. Now don't worry about wearing away any of the paint. You're not sanding too long in one spot that you're wearing it away too much. It might do it around the edges a little bit just because of the shape of the edge, but you're really just not putting a whole lot of pressure and just hitting that top. Now this is all smooth. Come back and do this edge and really feel it. You want to make sure nothing feels rough. Some people struggle with the edges. If you have to, you notice I keep turning it because I find it easier to sand forward than I do back. So I will just continue sanding into it. And then you will get a piece of paper towel and you will wipe that dust clean. Okay, just like that. And we will go ahead and continue with the next coat. So grab your paint. If you've done this just recently, then your little wedge should be good to go. So dip some paint and do exactly like you did before. And you should notice that that paint goes on a lot easier. A lot of paint on that particular dip, so I'm just doing my best to blend it all over, and I don't need much at the end here, so I'm really focusing on my edges to make sure they have enough paint, because this will probably be my last coat. If you feel like you need 3, then go ahead and do 3, but once again, when you're done, your wet wipe here, come in here and wipe it off. Sometimes I need to take my nail and just give it a little rub that way, because it just needs a little bit more scrubbing, just because it's already started to dry. But make sure your area on your wipe is still fairly wet. That helps as well. Grab a new one if you need to. And then just make sure you're not touching the top as you do this, so you don't leave prints in there. So now that is drying, and I'm going to leave that till after. So we'll put that off to the side. I don't need my makeup sponge anymore, so I'm just gonna leave it out and I'll trim it off after. Now, this should be dry just like the pink piece. So once again, I'm going to take my sandpaper and I'm going to give it a good sand. You want it to be buttery smooth before you start your second coat. And now watch, because you'll have some dust collecting in there. So just give it a little bit of a blow or wipe it off. And then we can continue on with that again. So grab a baby wipe. If you need to start in a new spot, just a little bit, blend it, and then very lightly wipe it. Now, when you're doing this, like I didn't come back before and tell you to wipe the edges, but because you really shouldn't have a whole lot on your baby wipe, but if you happen to get some on the edges, then just be sure to wipe that off, just like we did with the pink heart. So just now I feel, just based on what this looks like, and I like mine white. I'm just going to come back and do another coat after. There's one area that just likes to grab the paint. So just take your toothpick or whatever and just scratch it out. You just want it to be easy to be able to read, but yeah, so that's that one, and I'm checking my edges and they're good for me. So I'm just gonna let that set off to the side, and I will probably do one more coat before I put this all together. So we'll just put that there. Now, in the meantime, since we've done all that, this first coat is dry. So I'm just going to start giving it a sand. Now, once again, grab your 400 grit sandpaper, and you want to sand into the direction of the grain. Now, I like to sand up and down easier than it is side to side, just because when you do side to side, sometimes people tend to give a little bit of a curve to their side to side stroke. So if you go up and down, that's less likely to show. So once again, give that a sand, really making sure you're hitting that edge. Don't worry if you wear away the paint. The point at this time is to make sure this is smooth. All right, so I've done this part and it's smooth here. So I'm actually gonna flip this around and come in and do this. Now, once again, you will lift this up and do the sides. Okay, so when you're painting, you may get some paint on the back here, which it happens. When we are done all of our coats, before we assemble, then you can go back and you can sand that all off so it's nice and clean on the back. If you're going to paint a coat of paint on the back, then I would suggest that would be the first coat you do. And then you'll go and do what we did on the front with the sides, and then you'll just keep going back and forth. But to me, I just feel like no one's gonna see it, so there's no point painting it. Okay, so now that that's done and it's nice and smooth, you wanna give this a wipe. Get all that extra dust off. You have to take it out and give it a blow or something if you've got some dust left in those grooves. Blow it with my mouth, and we're gonna set up for the second coat of paint. So if any of your finished pieces are laying around where you feel that you can get them splashed by any paint, then move them further away. And come in here, and we will get started on that next coat. Grab your white paint and your brush. Now, there already might be enough in my brush to do my first coat, so on the one side, so I'm just gonna use what's in there, which is more than enough, and then I'm just gonna continue around. You should notice that the paint is a lot easier to apply on the surface that's already been sealed with one coat. Remember, as you do those edges, come back and check for any drips. If you went too heavy on that side, just come and feather that out. And then just keep rotating here. Done that, flip it over and start again at the top. Okay. Start in the middle, push your paint to the edges, get it in that first groove, and then come back and feather that out. And you should notice again that it is a lot easier to lay on there. And then just work your way down. Final stroke should take it right across, and then come back to your edges. Actually, I still have some more paint in my brush, so it's going to let me take it down further. Okay. Oops. Come back, feather that out. You can see there is not a super huge amount of paint on my brush. You just want enough to be able to do the area that you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to have to keep moving that around, and that's where it starts to dry. You get draggy marks and brush strokes. Let's feather that up. Check this edge and check your corners, and they're all good. So that way, it's always easier to smooth it out when it's still wet than it is when it's drying. So once that's done, we will come back and we will sand it again, but I'm going to let this dry. For me, 2 coats should be enough based on what I'm looking at. If you feel you need a third, go ahead and do that. It's always best to use less paint than more. So if you feel you need to do 3 on the whites, that is totally fine. So once again, I'm gonna place this off to the side. I'm not gonna wash my brush yet, just in case there's the odd touch-up I need to do. But as it's drying, it's looking pretty good to me. So I'm just going to set this off to the side this time, and I'm going to grab this one again. Because we're using such little paint, these don't take a whole lot of time to dry. So once again, take your sandpaper and sand it smooth. Blow out anything in there. I'm just gonna see. There we go. Okay, and then once again, grab my baby wipe, and I'm gonna do my last coat. So dip it, a lot of it off, and then gently there's hardly any on there. Blot it to even it out so you can see it looks all absorbed. Just gently, hardly any pressure, just wipe it on that top surface. Now, to me, this is a rustic sign, so if you can still see a little bit of the wood grain, I'm not worried about that. Go. So, as long as you can read it, you're good to go. Remember, check your edges. This side's got just a smidgen, so I'm just gonna come back, wipe it, make sure it doesn't have any paint on there. So the edges are nice and clean. want to leave that to dry. So I will come back when it's all ready to go, and we will do the whole assembly of your sign. All right, see you in a bit. Okay, so I'm back with preparing the rest of it for assembly. So now while the backboard is finishing its last of its drying, we can start to prepare the rest of the pieces for finishing and then assembly. So by now my stain is dry on my frame. That doesn't take very long as well. And once again, it's a little rough because the moisture from the stain has raised the grain. So we want to sand that. So find a piece of sandpaper that you had. We're looking for the fine one, which is the 400 grit. If it's a little dusty from sanding a different color, then you can just kind of wipe it off on your apron or a piece of towel or something, and then you're going to gently sand across your surface. You want it to feel nice and smooth again. So you can go back and forth this way with your grain. If you go this way, you'll see scratch marks that can be sometimes quite obvious when you're sanding against the grain. Okay, so now it is nice and smooth. Now, I did my best to not distress it. Now, if you like just a nice clean look, you can leave it. If you like to distress it a little bit, then you can really come in on those edges and wear them down. Do the same for the inside and the outside. I like doing this because it kind of gives the frame a bit more definition, and you can see where it's worn away a bit more. So when I'm sanding, I'm not sanding across this area against the grain, I'm just really hitting the edges. And then come back and do the outside. And just do it to what you like, and then just give it a wipe. And then you can set that off to the side there. All right. So next we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna sand this. Once again, same sandpaper, just wipe off any dust. Oops, I guess we could do the easel parts first since we're still working with the stain. So this one doesn't have to be quite as particular when you're sanding it. You're gonna find most of it is hiding in the back behind your sign anyway, so just give that a sand. And once again, if you want to distress those edges, just take your sandpaper along those edges and wear them down a little bit. And then just wipe off the dust. Okay, and then it's at the side. Okay, now we can come back to this. So 2 coats was good enough for me. I can see it's nice and solid, and it's not quite as rough as it was last time, so sanding doesn't take a whole lot of effort. And then once again, for me, I like to wear down the edges. So if you choose to, then just come back and do that. If you really want it to wear away faster or get it even more grittier looking, then you can take the rougher one and do that. But I find with the laser cut ones, the fine sandpaper works just as well, and it doesn't give too harsh of a sanding. And then once again, give that a wipe and set that off to the side. Okay, this piece is done. To me, it is still really smooth from just wiping on the paint, but I'm just gonna do a very gentle sand, and I might just wear away those edges just a little bit. And then that is done as well. Okay, So now your sign base should be dry. You should be happy with how many coats that you wanted. Mine has 2. I am good with that. And now I'm just gonna sand for smoothness. Flip it around. And then make sure to do those edges. Now, if you want to distress this, this is where you'll find that the grittier one works a lot better on a board like this. So I tend to just come in, work those edges, and remove some. When it gets to the corners, I tend to pull so it kind of rounds it a little bit. All right, so you can see, I think you can see hopefully, that you can see how it's brought down to the wood layer. That's what I like. And then I'm gonna take that same sandpaper and I'm gonna come in the back and I'm gonna try and remove some of that paint. Now, after your first coat, I said you didn't have to do this, but if you're finding you are getting a lot of paint on the back, if you leave it to after the second one, you're gonna find it's much harder to sand. So if you want to sand after each layer in the back too, you can do that to make it easier to remove. If you have an electric sander, which I do, but I'm not bringing it into this area, so then you can use that as well. But for the most part, you want to do this before you start to assemble the front. So that's good enough for now. Give that a wipe. Flip that over. Blow out any extra dust you might have. If you have a brush or something that, like an old paintbrush that's no longer usable and it all cleaned out, you can use that to kind of brush off anything on your surface. All right, so now do your best to wipe any dust you have away, because now we're going to start to work with the adhesive on the backs of this, and you don't really want that to get stuck on the back of your stickers there. All right, see, I'm wiping this and I'm still feeling some grits, so. There we go. Okay. So now you're going to take your frame and I want you to just kind of dry fit it so you can see what you need, excuse me, for spacing around your sign. So what you're going to do is you are going to evenly use this line and evenly space that a little bit above and a little bit below, and then just eyeball from side to side. Okay, so my eye is just really good, so I just was kind of noticing, and this is just a template, a sample cut one, and I'm noticing when they did it, they made this spacing here slightly off here, so it's kind of bugging my eye. But on your guys' boards, these 3, 4 here will be all the same, and the top and bottom will be the same. So you'll do, just like I said, you will do the same spacing here and the same spacing here, and then make sure it's centered side to side both ways. So if you're a person who needs like it to, you know, be evenly spaced, you know, tape is always, you can always take your tape measure and you can make little tape marks, and then you know exactly where you're going to put that. So but when it's time to go, you're going to flip it over and you're going to peel off the backing to your frame. So just watch as you do it. Sometimes it'll get stuck and it'll want to lift the adhesive, so if it does that, just roll this back and give it a rub so it catches that wood a bit better. Okay, so there we go. So now what you'll do is just try and hover above so you know exactly where you want it, because once this is stuck, it is stuck. It is nice and strong, so you want to make sure you are happy with where it's going to go. Make sure everything looks square. Okay, so I think I am happy with that. Okay, so once you're done, just let it go and wish for the best. And then give it, if you put it down, if you don't squish it down, if you had to move it, you should be able to gently lift it up. As soon as you make permanent contact with that and push it down, yeah, you would pretty much have to rip this right off before it'll come off. Okay, so that is that part. Now you will take this okay, so now we're video cut out of me. Okay, so we've reached this part, and now you're going to take your template and we're going to go and use that as our guide for this. So once again, just make sure all of your dust is wiped off and your surface is clean. Whoops. Here we go. Okay, so once again, same thing. You're gonna peel this back. Now I like to do it with the grain, it just tends to come off a little easier. There we go. Okay, flip this over and center it in that template and give it a press. Now, then you can pull this out and now it's evenly centered. All right, same thing with this. Because we've given you that guide, once we take that sticky off, then you will use that to center your little sign there. So get some good light. I know with the light in the room here right now, it's if I put my arm over it, it's gonna kind of block the edges, but just get into some good light and just gently line it up. If you lay it over and you feel like you didn't get it lined up, as long as you don't press it in there right away, you should be able to move it. But I am good, I don't see any edges, and I'm just gonna give that a press. Just like that. And you're all done. With the easel stand, you will take this slot into this slot, and now that becomes this. And then you can stand that on the table, and then this will stand in its place like that. Or you can put a command strip and hang it on the wall, or you can just lean it up against whatever area you're using to decorate. But yeah, all of this project is meant to coordinate with all of our collections, well, the Valentine's collection that has come out, so that way you can accessorize with all of those other pieces. And yeah, as we continue to bring out those new subscription boxes every month, then we will have other projects that will once again complement any collections that are coming out at the time. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this project. It's really simple and cute little project you can use throughout your year. Master bedroom, display for Valentine's, that kind of stuff. So, all right, we'll look forward to seeing you at the next box. Thanks, guys.